I'd like to talk about the process for just a second on Senate File 3656 and the bill that is before us. There's a couple of provisions in here that the governor has been asking for, I think, close to 6 weeks, be broken out and sent as separate bills. The first being the vulnerable adult protections and the second being opioids. We don't have a position as a Senate on vulnerable adults because that bill got blocked up in our committee process. When this bill left the Senate floor, I actually thanked Senator Housley because the Senate was still working on a standalone bill that was getting pretty strong and had a couple more pieces that we were planning on having some good discussions about. I think had a pretty good vote count. I think we were going to be able to get it even better on the floor. But instead, what we have before us is a conference committee report that is not able to be amended. We can only talk about it and have an up or down vote that completely ignores the consumer's work product from the work group. I honestly, I don't know what consumers could have done to help make the Senate more aware of the horrible situation that is occurring across the state of Minnesota. We have over 400 complaints coming in every single week still. The administration has done a lot of work to improve the processes at the Office of Health Facility Complaints, but these egregious occurrences are still happening all across our state, and we need a real process and a real regulatory structure to address them. The consumer groups have brought lists to each and every one of us of the specific horrors that have occurred to seniors in our districts. They've pled with us. They've brought, family members. They've come and they've cried with us about things that have happened to them and their family and their loved ones. And to not have an opportunity to even honestly debate and make amendments and take a vote on what we should be doing to address this very serious issue is just wrong, members. We shouldn't have this only before the Senate as a conference committee position where the Senate hasn't even had the opportunity to have an open debate about it. For that alone, with the governor's veto promise, it's not a veto threat, it's a veto promise. He said it about this bill in its current form in front of the press earlier today. Madam President, members, we want to get a bill done this year. We sincerely want to have something to show for these months that we've spent here in St. Paul, away from our families and our loved ones, and this bill is not it. I hope that we can send this bill back to conference committee. Real quickly on the opioid, the Senate did take a position. We voted 60-6 on this Senate floor to hold pharmaceutical companies accountable for the harm that they've caused and helped foster in bringing about the opioid crisis all across the state of Minnesota. And this bill has nothing to hold pharmaceutical companies and distributors accountable for the burden that they bear in the opioid epidemic that we have all across this state. I'm going to go through a couple of the pieces in the bill about vulnerable adult protections, but members, I did pass out a letter from the AARP, the Alzheimer's Association, Elder Voice Family Advocates, Legal Aid, and Minnesota Elder Justice Center. This is the group that put together the consumers' recommendations for what we should be doing. I don't know that I've ever had such a strongly worded letter. The vulnerable adult protection article in this bill actually moves us backwards in protecting vulnerable adults in the state of Minnesota. This is a huge win for industry and a huge loss for vulnerable adults all across the state of Minnesota, and it is just egregious to have it before us here for the first time in a conference committee report unamendable. It should not be the case, and the governor has been pleading with the legislature to send him a clean bill, work with the administration, and figure out how to get this stuff right. It actually takes away existing rights. In group homes, in nursing homes, in mobile home parks, consumers have protections against arbitrary discharges. In assisted living facilities, they don't. Vulnerable adults can, and it's been documented many times, they are discharged to homeless shelters in the street at times. It's unconscionable and unacceptable, and yet this bill provides no protection against arbitrary eviction and a limited, delayed, and ineffective provision regarding termination of services. It is the same old, an industry win, a consumer loss. There are no provisions in this article allowing people to civilly enforce the rights that are provided. We have rights for wrongful discharge and eviction. We have rights for deceptive marketing. We have rights for retaliation from providers against consumers. But there are no rights of private action for consumers to actually enforce the rights that we talk about in glowing terms. That is no right at all if there's no right to civilly enforce it. And we can improve the Office of Health Facility Complaints, but government regulators are not a substitute for private enforcement, as exists in many other areas of our law. It also fails to provide legal representatives, families, and loved ones with the necessary authority to advocate for and enforce the rights of a vulnerable adult and to be free from retaliation for doing so. The electronic monitoring piece in this article is horribly defective. Families that rely on these devices to monitor the well-being and prevent abusive treatment of their loved ones are ignored in this article, and it places intimidating and obstructionist barriers to the existing right of vulnerable adult to place a camera in the room by codifying the indignity of requiring a legal guardian to verify the vulnerable adult's consent in the presence of a facility's employee. So they have to go and make this vulnerable adult talk about the camera in front of the employee. This is something that wasn't in the bills, wasn't discussed, wasn't ever there, and it's frankly over the top, an industry-led provision. It takes away existing rights for those living in board and lodging facilities to be free from arbitrary transfer or discharge. Under the existing Health Care Bill of Rights, these residents shall not be arbitrarily transferred or discharged. And this has never been seen in any previous version of any bill in the Senate. It's obviously never been heard, vetted, or debated in any committee. It doesn't belong on the Senate floor in a conference committee report unamendable. I think I'll just stop there and ask for member support in sending this bill back to conference committee, get these two articles that the governor has requested over and over and over again be sent separate out of this bill, and fix the other provisions that the governor has significant issues with, and get a bill that we can pass. It is 10:30 Saturday night. We've got to be done in 25 and a half hours. This isn't a path to an end that we could be proud of.